So first of all, few things about my company. So the current company I work with is called Thrive Digital. It's a 100% subsidiary of HM Health Solutions, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Highmark Health, which is a $15 billion company. It's a healthcare company. So as you might be aware, in the US, healthcare means it is insurance side of the business, which means there are patients who are members of health plans, and those plans or those insurance claims are all taken care by the platforms that we manage. In India, since this request has come from you, um, this session will be about our Indian style of healthcare, which is really the patients, the hospitals, pharmacy, that side of the business, right? So that is the first thing. And the second one is, standard disclaimers which we are supposed to do, which is um, I am most of whatever I'm going to tell is all my opinion. And wherever I have mentioned here, like for example, if you see in this cartoon, the source is clearly quoted. So I am not going to erase a source from where I am taking. If something is original, I will tell you that it is mine. Otherwise, please assume that it is all available in public domain. And in this field, the other important standard disclaimer that I want to do is, I am about to complete about 25 years next year in IT, but does not mean that in this new world, right, new technology world, I am as good as a fresher of, let's say, 2 to 3 years of experience in MLA. The reason being, this industry is like this. We have to continuously learn, and today's kids who pass out of engineering colleges, they already know 2 to 3 years of Python, and so you can almost equate me in that sense there. But the difference is that how much of uh, theory we have imbibed in the past in our academic life, maybe 30 years back, and how much of that we are able to relearn now in a different way and apply to healthcare. In that sense, we are slightly ahead. But otherwise, as a standard disclaimer, I would like to state that, there is no real reason for anyone to feel that am I too late to learn AI/ML, or we are all almost plus or minus 3 to 5 years, unless there are doctorates here who already know a lot more than us. So that is the context I want to set, and I want to get into few of the live examples. I have frankly been I have had the pleasure of working in those healthcare projects, which are all personal projects which I worked on and learned how analytics is really done, what changes it makes to the life of on the ground folks in the country, and what kind of tools are available and how we can use them for effective analytics. Some of the capabilities and myths, and these are again personal opinion, and obviously you each one of you can feel free to voice yours. And as such, I'm going to talk about the healthcare landscape because it's constantly changing with startups coming in. Every day there are new startups and new areas where they are getting into. And one of the key things that I personally feel is needed is this emphasis on visualization. And when I come to that slide, probably I'll talk about the power of visualization and why it is all the more important in today's life. And some of the real life examples, real life projects that I can walk you through, and why a generic problem solving mindset will really help. And it can be applied to any business case or a use case rather than you know a cookie cutter approach for each scenario. I also will give you the list of sources from where I am taking the data. So any questions, feel free to ask. I don't know how you are taking the other sessions, but feel free to use the chat window, or if somebody wants to prompt me that something is in the chat window I'm not able to see, please point me to that. Fine. So I'm
Sure,
going to
sir.
So I'm going to give a 3-5 second pause after every slide or after every logical group of slides, so that if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Uh, I don't mind. So don't feel that you're interrupting. Okay. So just to set a context. Okay. So usually, right. So what happens is we tend to think of AI and ML in a different sense, and each one comes with their own perspective, right? So I want to talk about a project that I was personally working on last year. So this was about, so down south, so in that area between Madurai, Tirunelveli, there were about 4 towns that we chose. And in those towns, there was a need for um, malnutrition related treatment. So we used, so there was there is an NGO which is working in these towns, and they wanted to do it in maybe 100 villages or towns across India. They want to start it to do a pilot in these 4 towns. So what we did is, for about 300 children in government schools, we tried to see if in 1 year we can do Ayurvedic treatment. It is not really a treatment, it's more like a nutrition supplement that gets added with milk, and along with few other things gets uh, given to children on a periodic basis. They are checked and how they are doing in terms of BMI, which is uh, weight divided by height squared. So how their body mass index is improving over a period of time. It's a simple project at the outset, right? But tremendous learnings from there. And why I want to start this as the context for this session is that we might think of healthcare and getting disrupted by ML, AI, etc. But just that the simplicity of projects, and why simple techniques such as standard analysis, going through standard operating procedures, or simple things like keeping in check, what does the statistics say? What does reality say? So this NGO appointed a an agency to find out statistically significant results, whether they are coming out of their exercise. So after about 1 quarter of this ashwagandha related treatment to the children, so this NGO approached this agency, and they said that okay, um, they measured 3 months of data and said okay, yeah, there is progress, and then it continued. So after about 9 months, this agency called all the doctors, called all of us. So we were basically volunteers, right? And made this presentation in which they said there is some significant p-value that we are able to see in, let's say, 40 children, but remaining 260 children, there is not that kind of significance. And you know what happened, right? Because it's like saying that, in front of a parent, you're going and telling your child is stupid, right? So it's like telling that in front of doctors. So if you say your medicine is useless in front of so many doctors, and my statistics say so, so the doctors started saying that, hey, I am able to see fresh faces when I go there. The children seem fresh. This child used to have fever almost every day. The fever seems to have reduced. This child will always be crying, very sensitive. Now I see him bright. So what happens, statistics. So the people who came with these statistics, p-value, f-test, z-test, right? Now they went on the defensive. They said, no, this is what statistics says. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is there's a difference between what reality is and what statistics say. So let us take analytics with a pinch of salt. That is the first thing I wanted to talk about here. The second one we felt is about instruments. So we might have totally ignored statistics, or this analytics might have totally ignored what kind of instruments are they using and whether it will have any impact on the analysis. So for example, the scale that was used to measure height and weight were all different in all 4 towns. So imagine if we had done this in 100 towns, what would have happened? So if you see a weight improvement, so from 4.1 to 4.2 is not the same as 4.09 to 4.11, right? But the way the roundup was happening in the data because of imprecise scales was that a 4.15 will be called 4.2, and the child would have shown an improvement in BMI because of that, real or vice versa. Whereas reality will be very different. So the instruments that are chosen, the process of collecting data is very important, and that is one great learning here. The third one we found out is across age groups and weight groups, we found significant difference, and that was not coming out in the initial analysis. Obviously, when the doctor started talking about it, the statisticians started doing group-wise analytics. So what I mean by that is, so let us say there is an age group of 6 to 8 years. Okay, so those children and the children who were in that 10 to 12 years showed significantly high weight growth compared to 8 to 10. Reason being, so let us say a child is really malnourished. For that child, the improvement percentage, obviously because of the denominator being small, the malnourishment reduction will be far more compared to, let's say, a child who is already obese or already the weight is, the BMI is correct or the correct at the correct level. And the other thing that why we can't take data alone and just go with that is also because, so the parents used to come and tell about, hey, you are telling about malnutrition, but my child is every day having headache, every day he throws tantrums, or he's having maybe one eye is not, he's not able to see one eye with one eye properly, or some dental problems, for example. So these folks who went with the agenda of malnutrition had to take care of other things also, right? Otherwise, they will lose the trust of the parents. So the learning here is that when you come to data analytics, unless we see that 360-degree picture, we can't really say, okay, this is what is probably really happening. And so at the end of about 1 year, the statisticians and the parents and the doctors, they all concluded that, okay, there is significant difference in at least 240 children, if not in 300. 240 children, there was improvement. But if you notice, some of the parents started telling that, hey, how are you saying that this BMI improvement is only because of your medicine? Because somebody's income level might have increased, somebody might have started having, let's say, in Tamil we call kanji or kool, right? So those have nutritional elements anyway. So they may say that, okay, maybe my own food habits have changed, and same with my children, because of which it is possible that their BMI has improved. So what happens in a lot of these healthcare related analytics, right? Very tough to attribute a BMI improvement in this case to specific treatment, because you can't say that this is just because of that. It's like a person scoring high marks in maths, and why that the all the credit cannot be attributed the teacher. The same problem, right? So very similar. And the other thing is numbers and beyond, which is, so somebody will, the freshness that the doctor said, right? The child looks fresh. So freshness is never monitored in the BMI, height, weight, or in terms of numbers, right? It's just a perception of the doctors or those nurses, correct? And so unless we quantify those, just the numbers itself, hard numbers, might not produce enough result. And the second one is about maybe the environment of the children has become better, maybe the weather in a place has become better, or food quality, or maybe they have started sourcing nutritional vegetables, general eating habits. All of this would have attributed to reduction in malnutrition. So the summary is, I like this phrase by my college professor about 26 years back. So he says that, he used to say, hey, if you want to sell an AC, don't sit inside an AC room. Because if you want to sell an AC, you have to go in the sun, stand in the sun, and really feel what a person who is standing in the sun is feeling. Unless you do that, you won't really feel that, okay, what all qualities are needed to become a great AC salesman. You need to go on the ground, and that holds good for any data analytics related project as well. So before I go on to the next one, any questions on this slide? Because this is the context and I'm going to go with this. So summary is numbers are great, analytics is great, AI/ML will solve lots of problems, but take it with a large pinch of salt and don't be in a hurry. That's the summary. Okay, I'll assume there are no questions. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Audible.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI/ML, DL. So overall, without getting into the theory of it, machine learning is very much part of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is, as you all might know, not new to this world. It's about 50, and we are now using computers to apply to multiple business applications. But otherwise, as a concept, it is pretty old. Lot of leaning with statistics and biology and several other things related to healthcare. Machine learning is, so while artificial intelligence is about how a human being will relate to certain situations and how we can use that to morph behavior or design systems which are close to how the brain reacts to things. Machine learning is a subset which says, okay, if a child behaves this way, let's say if a child touches fire and if it is able to sense fire, how a child behaves, and can a machine be learning how a child behaves when the child touches fire, right? So that is the machine learning part of it. And deep learning is more about finding out patterns. So let us say everywhere somebody touches a fire, is it going to cause the same reaction, or is it only human beings, or is it let's say a plant touching fire, is it the same reaction, and should the decisions be taken based on that same reaction that be the same across scenarios? So those are all deep learning pattern recognition related techniques, and I want to talk about this commonality between some of these. So for example, I think you folks had one session on security by someone from DRDO, right? So I'm sure this person might have spoken to you about anomaly detection. Now, if you take anomaly detection, right? So anomaly detection is what? When there is something which is going in a normal path, if the standard deviation is far higher all of a sudden from the mean, then you say that, okay, there is some deviation, may not be an anomaly. But let's say for maybe 2 years, something has never had a standard deviation more than 2%. Let's say it suddenly spikes to 5%, then that's an anomaly, right? So why I want to specifically talk about anomaly detection is, if you look at, let's say, weather. So if you look at Chennai weather, for example, typically now in the last 1 year, maybe 2 years, the kind of rain I have seen here, I have not seen in maybe 35 years in Chennai. At least I have not seen. Not because of the cyclone alone, but also the general weather pattern. So probably there is an anomaly, which data I don't have, but I'm able to tell out of perception, right? And same, you folks would have also noticed with, let's say, your students in your college, right? When they score marks, suddenly some child scores, usually scores about 70, but suddenly scores 95. You're stuck by that anomaly, right? And same holds good for server. So let's say there is a server in which 100,000 hits or 200,000 hits every day, and suddenly the server gets 2 million hits in 2 days. Then that's an anomaly, right? So something is happening. Either a bot is hitting it, or maybe somebody is trying to hack, or whatever, correct? Or maybe there is real increase in load. Same goes for heartbeat in healthcare. So if my pulse is 72 per minute, suddenly becomes 102, then that's an anomaly, right? So all I'm saying is, in health analytics, we have to find out more than health analytics. What I would like to emphasize here is find out the patterns in algorithms and try to see which one will be applicable in which scenario. So maybe you need to create a map of what is the business case, what is the problem you want to solve, what is the algorithm which will fit this scenario best, right? So I want to stop here in case there are any questions. 2-3 seconds maybe. Okay, this is also going to emphasize a very similar thing where um, if we say that if sales has to increase, then salespeople have to have a shaved head. That kind of data, if statistics is going to give, it's a trouble, right? And those days we used to say in the mid 80s, there used to be a correlation between uh, rains in Tokyo and the Bombay Stock Exchange index going up. So those kind of correlations, right, might be here and there, sporadic, but they may not be time tested, and we cannot have numbers alone dictate certain decisions. So and today, if you see, the ethics in AI comes into play here. So just take data science or machine learning with a pinch of salt, and not all decisions can be taken with that. However, there are complexities in data science, such as ethical skills and lifelong skills, and real life, the culture aspect we can't forego. So let us remember that when we get into any of the analytics related projects. If even if you notice now, very recently, Google is having ethics related issues with respect to AI, and it is not unexpected, because the complexity in cultures worldwide, adopting common algorithms or standard algorithms across the world for everything is definitely not going to work. If these algorithms have to become localized, otherwise ethics related issues are going to crop up. So basics don't change, right? Uh, and what I mean by that is, so I've read this fascinating book called Factfulness. I'm sure a lot of you would have also heard or read about this book. So the simple things that, so before getting deep into health analytics or even analytics, general analysis skills should not be forgotten. So for example, this author, Hans Rosling, he says that if you take a data, don't see the absolute data. Typical one is COVID, right? If you look at COVID deaths, compare India with, let's say, a country like maybe Austria or Poland, numbers will look enormous. But if you look at per capita COVID, maybe we are not that bad, right? So use comparison or division. So if you divide COVID as based on even when you divide it per capita, COVID is also a divide operation, but you can take it in various ways. So you can say that across genders, across regions, across cold places, because originally COVID was not supposed to hit hard in warm places, right? So can we find out similarities? And in any data set, if you see, you can do comparison, you can do division operation with another numeric variable. You can find out differences within groups. You can say that, okay, within regions, this is how this pandemic has progressed, or within certain groups, within certain genders, within certain profiles or income groups or any demography, what are the similarities, what are the differences? So any data set that you take, all of these operations are possible, right? So when we look at analytics, let's not forget the basics of analysis. And I would strongly suggest, if you have not read this book, this is a good book for starting with general analysis before diving deep into analytics. And some of the interesting things that this book talks about are the trends. So if you notice, long-term trends might get amplified by several of these outside folks who have a vested interest. So do your own analysis and come out with your own conclusion rather than getting sidetracked by vested interests. And averages are great, but in the end, I'm going to have one slide about that specifically is simplification of this analysis and talking about the visualization of it. So however complex the data might be, unless the explanation is simple, unless the visualizations are powerful, the meaning will be lost. All the effort that we put into analytics might be lost. So just thought of taking a minute on this slide. Any questions so far? This is a pretty hello. Any questions so far? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Okay, great. So what we are going to deep dive is a little bit of predictive and prescriptive. Before going there, just that, descriptive is explanatory. So if you look at this part, this is exploratory analysis, right? And that is what is descriptive. So you go across the breadth and find out what is happening in my area, in that data, what it is trying to say, and do some basic visuals. And why is probably what is the diagnostics. It will say why this is happening. And let's say take that old example of anomaly detection. Why is an anomaly happening is a diagnostic information. Can you predict the next anomaly? Can you predict the next pandemic? Can you predict the next, I mean, I don't want the next pandemic, but can you predict the next, let's say, next new drug that's going to come out, or next new health Fitbit that's going to come out? So those are all predictive, right? And the last one is, can a doctor be replaced? Is it possible to get my prescription the moment I tell I have 102 fever and a little bit of stomach ache? So can I get a prescription right away and that prescription goes online and that medicine comes to my home? That's prescriptive, right? So very, very simplistic terms, little bit of healthcare, but in general. So if you have any questions, please feel free to stop. So some of these are skill sets, right? And a lot of times it is R versus Python or Ruby, Go, and you have plenty of languages nowadays. So I'm not really going to go too deep, but all of us, when we get into coding, we will automatically find out what is good for what purpose. So for example, for me, text analytics, R is good. Python is good for quick visualizations, and some of the deep learning algorithms are all far faster. R is good for trend related visualizations and network charts. Those R is good. So I I don't want to be a prescriptive person on the tools usage, but feel free to dive into them and you can explore. So R versus Python again is comparing Batman versus Superman. So it's each person's opinion. So as much as possible, I try and avoid discussion on this. People have to just deep dive and find out. So in this slide, I want to specifically capture about, please pass on if at all there is one slide you want to take to your students, right? That would be this slide. Who think that, hey, can I work on AI and those kind of fundamental questions if they have. I wanted to take this slide. And the reason I will tell you is very simple. If you look at the last one in this slide, chatbots, these are getting created by 11-year-old, 12-year-old children in the UK. And I am sure it's in India as well. So this chatbot, for example, is a very similar thing that we use in healthcare. There are apps, I will show you in one of the later slides, where there are, so let's say there is an old person in a home and he or she is not having any other person to support. And this person just needs a medicine, let's say a diabetic medicine every month, right? So this chatbot is available, and all this person needs to do is open the app and say that, okay, supply, or maybe some keyword which says, okay, my diabetes medicine is now, I'm running short of this medicine, right? So what this chatbot does, it immediately goes and checks, okay, this phone number belongs to which member, this person is what type of diabetes, what was the earlier prescription, what is this person's address, sends this message to the nearest pharmacy based on the location, and then that pharmacy delivers the diabetic medicine to this old person. Now, you may think it's a simple chatbot. Okay, what am I going to learn, right? But just think of the application of the simple self-service tool where a chatbot can do something as powerful as helping an old person who otherwise has to take his or her own effort to go and get this medicine, right? So just a simple thing about the simplification that we can do, and all of these are all each one can have application. So in fact, I can take the second one, which is the third one on this one called Snap, right? So what it does is it is a Scratch-based application where if you show it an image, it will recognize what type of image it is. So at the outset, it looks very simple, right? So let's say you show it a playing card, whether it is clubs or hearts, it will be able to recognize that and it will pronounce that maybe orally, or it will show it in text form. Now, look at the application in healthcare. So today, if you see, look at a typical a lung X-ray. So if you show the computer a lung X-ray of a standard lung, how a normal lung is supposed to function, right? And train the computer with that image with multiple strong lung images. And later on, let's say there is some kind of slightly weak lung, and if you want to show that X-ray, the machine is automatically going to say that, hey, I have learned that strong lung has these features based on coordinates and whatever other analysis, and it's going to say I see a variation in this X-ray. Possibly it's not as strong a lung, and then slowly it can also start saying, okay, this is 80% strength lung, this is a 70%, and etc. Right? Now, just think of this application which has been built by maybe 11-year-old or a 12-year-old somewhere. But the concept that this child imbibes is applicable in, the algorithm is almost base algorithm is very similar to what is used in the Snap card image recognition algorithm. So I want to take maybe 10-second pause in case there are questions. Okay. So is usually the class this silent, or so I just wanted to understand. Okay. So some of the capabilities. So how many of you thought that we will get a COVID vaccine through some artificial intelligence program the first month after the pandemic was announced? How many of you thought it will come in 1 month? Did anybody ask so many of these artificial intelligence experts, hey, why did you not bring me the COVID vaccine the moment it was announced? Right? So this question, I know what the answer is. So while AI has been very good in, let's say, breast cancer detection. So today, the precision with which a doctor can accurately identify a breast cancer, AI can do that. Deep learning, a deep mind can do that same thing with 100% precision, probably faster than the doctor. But there are areas where there is still things where artificial intelligence and ML, there is a lot more learning and sizable amount of research that needs to be done before it gets perfected in other terminally ill diseases. So while there is significant amount of problem solving that can happen because of AI, let's not blow it out of proportion. It is possible, but just that so many misconceptions that people have about whether it will replace jobs, it will replace uh, so things like emotion, for example, happiness, right? So those are all those philosophical things which maybe AI cannot solve for now, and those will remain maybe within human reach of remedy. I'm not going to go too deep into this. It's just a landscape of AI. But I'll stop for a few seconds just in case you want to know about anything specific here. Sorry. Okay. Now I'm going to go into a little bit into what is happening in healthcare startup world. And next few slides are going to be very similar. So if you look at these startups, so healthcare is massive, right? And if you look at the domains here on this page, there are plenty of opportunities for getting into this. At the same time, it's a regulated industry. Not everybody can get into it. And we might think getting into this is very tough. But if you look at how technology has disrupted this siloed industry or an industry with lots of entry barriers, we can see that people are focused on very, very narrow areas. So, for example, drug discovery, the first one, if you see Recursion, so they are trying to do what is called, maybe in our terms, biomedical or bioengineering, that you might like to call. So they are trying to do drug discovery through those means. And if you look at, let's say, a Zebra, what they are trying to do is, let's say, patient information after stripping out all the confidential information, such as, let's say, name, address, date of birth, or tax IDs, etc. Right? Can we get that patient information and then profile those for those diseases that they have? For example, diabetes, right? What Zebra is trying to do is take up a disease at a time and take out all the unnecessary, only the core information, and do two things. One is take out the numeric data that comes with this. So let's say demography, disease type, whether it is about what kind of area it is in. Is it related to child care? Is it related to disability? Is it related to which part of the organ, a body part, etc. So they are trying to do that from a dimension analysis point of view. The second one is which type of information can be monetized to be sold to others or maybe made available on public platforms. So it's about monetizing information, and you must be aware of so much of social media footprint that we do is all available for sale somewhere, right? We might not be aware that it is our own information, but it is coming back to us in some way, right? So very similar, but and we might question the ethics of it, but as long as our personal information is not stuck in it, I think we should be open to share it. Again, this is my own opinion. So these are all some of the interesting things that, in a very narrow, focused manner, some of these startups have started doing. In this slide, if you see, this is a lot more about specific area where within healthcare. So if you see broadly, patient data is a huge, like I told about the previous example, where the company is trying to take patient data and monetize it, or at least give it through social means as a service. And is there a way we can use that data for better recovery, better learning, so that the algorithms can become better? So that's a noble thought. The other one is in medical imaging, which is, so if you see X-rays or charts like the pulse rates that you get, things like that, where as such the data might not be directly numeric, it might be pictorial. So can we convert? So these medical imaging diagnostics companies are trying to see if they can visualize those in a different manner, because an X-ray probably today is not readable by today it is readable. Those days it used to be not readable by standard normal human being. A doctor could clearly immediately tell, but can that be visualized differently? Can that be the meaning of that be conveyed differently? And how IoT is coming into the diagnostics part of it, where let's say when you're jogging in the morning, for example, if you're having a Apple Watch or some uh, instrument attached to you, there is continuous monitoring, and your any of the functions of your body which are relevant to that app can be monitored and relate to you as a summary of your profile and how your running has been that day, right? And same holds good for multiple other things mentioned here, like inpatient hospital management, for example. In your stretcher, so let's say the ICUs have, let's say, 12 beds. Each bed is fitted with intelligent devices where there is continuous monitoring of various things. It could be heartbeat, how the brain is working, how other parts of the body, what about the blood supply and oxygen supply, and all of those through this IoT device can be monitored without the nurses or the doctors continuously sitting there and monitoring them. And wherever there is again that anomaly, right? Exceptional cases, the doctors or nurses can go and do those treatments. So we are still at early stages, but summary is IoT plus 5G plus this images getting translated into much human readable form, plus patient data monetization. I think these are all in a way going to help transform AI and make human life that much more easier to live uh, in this world. So, any questions so far? So, this is one of the slides I was talking about earlier. So, in health technology, if you see, so one of which is, maybe I should talk about telehealth. So, the example of that old person getting a diabetic medicine supplied to uh, his or her home, right? So that is probably a part of telehealth, where, so telehealth basically means virtual doctor, right? So how, just look at this slide shows there are about maybe close to 1,000 companies which are uh, technology related health companies which are trying to disrupt this healthcare world, and it is in various areas. So if you take up patient engagement, so today what used to be a long journey to the doctor's office, sit there and do something, lot of that initial work in patient engagement gets done upfront or maybe later. So things like, let's say I have to wait for a bill, and in some of the hospitals, the getting a printout from after the billing is done is probably longer than the wait that you had for the doctor itself. So those kind of patient engagement related solutions. And can you do a better search? So for example, sometimes you will, let's say there is a kid at home who's suddenly not well, and you have to take that person to a pediatrician. Now, search services, there are 28, which is written here. Maybe at least I know of about, this number should be about 50 by now, where there is very, very focused. So you can fill up a questionnaire and it will clearly tell this doctor is available at this location. And right now, the appointment time is this, that level of technology, uh, related help is available. And we all know about mobile fitness apps, right? So plenty of them available. So summary in this slide is that at least about 1,000 startups waiting to disrupt this industry, and in India as well. I mean, a lot of these are have their own arms in India as well, or some of these are actually Indian. So just that this is a booming industry, and analytics is definitely uh, the next step. All of these folks who are now collecting data or aggregating data, they're going to get into. Any questions? So I spoke about visualization sometime back, right? So this might look suddenly like a different slide within health analytics, right? Or any analytics. But I want to give you two um, reasons for why visualizations are going to play a key role in the future. The first one is 5G. So if you look at today the link that I am working out of, this is a broadband line. So this broadband line, let's say the speed is about 100G, though the 5G line is going to be at least maybe 5 or 8 times faster than this. Now, with that kind of fast line, what is going to happen? The IoT devices that are going to connect smart cars, smart cities, the kind of information that they are going to give out in the next 5 years is going to just grow exponentially faster. So, which means that much faster storage spaces, write only devices, maybe the hardware that has to grow in tandem with the kind of speed in growth in bandwidth, all of that has to happen. That is the first one. So that is from the 5G speed point of view. And because of that, right, what is going to happen? The speed with which the data needs to be analyzed, it needs to grow that much faster. So one is the upload speed and the resultant data that will grow exponentially. The second one is the analytics that needs to be done. So real time, so much of this, let's say smart city or even a simple thing as us running on a treadmill, to a smart car, to a monitoring of a patient in an ICU. All of these are going to need real time monitoring, and each one varies in terms of intensity and severity. So, what is the most important thing that needs to be done? Doctors or the people who need to take decisions need to get, number one, a very good summary, number two, a very good visual. So this chart, so it could be a histogram, but unless the histogram says where right now that data is coming from, or rather trending, and what can be expected in future, so maybe a histogram should also be overlapped with maybe a line chart which will say, okay, this is where I'm trending. And maybe it should say, okay, out of all of these dots in the trend line, maybe these ones at right at the top, right at the bottom, probably are the anomalies, right? So unless the speed with which data is getting uploaded, speed with which the data needs to be analyzed, and the summary data that is needed for the decision makers comes out in a very succinct form, in a nice visual, it's going to be tough to balance the surge in data volume, right? So I want to just re-emphasize the power of visualization, and the need for storytelling cannot be emphasized more. Particularly with better visuals, you can tell far better stories, and that's why this slide on visualization. Any questions before I move on to the some of the real life projects that I found pretty interesting? No questions? Hello? Hello?
Sir, it's audible, sir. But participants are not putting the questions in chat box. Uh,
Either
it's a
session has been absolutely exciting
yes, sir.
or okay.
Dear participants, if you have any queries, put it in the chat box. I'll convey that info to the guest.
Okay. Few things on this slide. So number one, I just thought some of these could be good examples of how we can use numeric data and text data. So if you see in this slide, I have taken this from one of the GitHub posts. So where it has a so it is a simple drug that has been prescribed to, let's say, maybe few thousand patients, and out of those patients they are asked, okay, after you have been taking this drug for, let's say, 6 months or so, what is your rating of this drug? Has it been effective? And it can be for any illness. And this rating, whatever they are giving, they have averaged it out, etc. And whether this is an approved drug or not, so the government usually does some approval. Some drugs could be without approvals, right? And the dosage, so is it standard dosage? Is it how many times per day does it make a difference for that patient and for that illness, right? So they have done some very good analysis of this. And this interesting thing which I saw, so the simplest one that I can tell you now in terms of visual is that, the number of times a drug gets prescribed by a certain doctor, and if the effectiveness rating is highest for that drug, right, across patients, then we can safely assume it is a good drug, right? So let us say that scenario one that you see on the right, let us say this is not available to you. So what they have done is taken the doctor's prescription, and they have gone through all the terms that are there in those prescriptions. I know that it is tough to read doctor's prescriptions, but for a machine it's not that tough. So they have come out with terms that recur, and out of those terms, how many are frequently occurring? And they have taken those words and over a period of time found out that, okay, for these type of drugs, these are the uh, kind of side effects, or these are the kind of uh, rating that has been given. So they have basically correlated or used in conjunction text analytics with numeric analytics. So just a way of when numbers don't tell the whole picture, lot of text can also give a very good view. So if you look at this part, right, this algorithm is the same that people use for movie reviews. So if you go to a movie, right, Vijay movie, Ajit movie, and if there is let's say 100 of us go to that movie and we give reviews, and those reviews are analyzed as one text, and if they are put as bubble charts or whichever uh, uh, movie review comment comes out as the top used text, and just assume those text occurrences are tabulated here. So what will you see is, what did you really feel about that Ajit movie or that Vijay movie, right? And if you notice, the same algorithm is used here for a doctor prescription. So summary is that if we all understand that the commonality of an algorithm can be used in multiple use cases, that is, and our ability to use that specific algorithm in those uh, use cases is what is more important than and in future this is going to become more and more commoditized, where I can choose an algorithm and run it against a data set. And that's how, in this particular slide, the text analytics used in conjunction with numeric analysis has been made use of. Any questions here? Okay, so this is not really a healthcare example, but I'm going to tell you in the end how this is very well related to a healthcare example, and you can use the same algorithm with very little changes to the base algorithm. Obviously, the columns will differ. So in one of my previous companies, we started working on a project where we needed about 8,000 people certified in full stack technology in couple of years. So uh, when we started, it was about 30 certifications per month, which roughly will be about, at the end of 2 years, we will have maybe 700 or 800 full stack developers, right? But the company said, no, we want 8,000. So you must know the challenge now, right? So what we need to do, we need to scale up these 30 certifications to about 400 per month. Otherwise, we will miss this target of 8,000 people getting certified, correct? The second challenge was, if we need 8,000 to be certified, how much should we really target? So let's say if there is a dropout of 10%, then we need at least 10,000 people to be undergoing certification. Only then we will end up getting 8,000 people, right? If the dropout is, let's say, 20%, we need to target maybe 12 or 14,000, right? In reality, we ended up targeting 30,000 folks. But at the beginning, we did not know this, correct? So how much to target is the second challenge. Now, at the time of enrollment to assessment, there was a number of time period. So let's say I am given certification on January 1, but I take the assessment, the initial assessment, right? I take it only on, let's say, February 1, which means 1 month I have sat on that assessment, correct? Which is in days, it's called assessment aging. So after I clear the assessment, I get a score beyond, let's say, 50% or so. I start my learning. I'm eligible for learning. So my learning starts until my completion of learning. It's called learning progress or learning aging. So my progress is in percentage, aging is in days. And then after this is a certification. Usually people who learn complete course usually end up getting certified. So there was hardly any dropout here, maybe a 2% or a 3% dropout, because the certification exam was probably much simpler once learning is complete. Now, in this project, right? So what we did what were the key factors that helped us identify move from 30 certifications per month to about 400 per month? What helped us identify how many certified developers do we need, right? That is what is given here. So what we ended up finding out is people who take the lowest time to get into assessment. So for example, I told you about the person who takes a course, who gets enrolled on a Jan 1, does the assessment on a Feb 1, right? If a person takes more than 5 days, sits on the assessment for more than 5 days without completion and gets an assessment score, all those folks are slow learners. And whoever does it within 5 days tended to get to this learning completion within 100 days, which was really the target. The second one we found out was what were the key features needed and how do we select those? So if you see feature selection, PCA, what is called as principal component analysis. So if you take that, so principal component analysis showed 6 variables. One is assessment number of days. What is the score, assessment score? what is the learning progress? What is the learning aging in days? How much percentage of assignment completion year to date are they doing? And how well they are attending classes, right? So these were the 6 factor variables or variables that we gave for independent variables that we gave to the algorithm. And it showed 2 things. One is a learning progress in percentage, learning aging in terms of days as the key features that we need to work on. So if you look at this learning burn rate, what we call a burn rate is actually the same as learning progress divided by learning aging, which is, so in one of my earlier slides, I told you about the division, right? So when you take a data, don't take data absolute values, divide it by something else. So we found out that learning progress divided by learning aging can be called as something like a learning burn rate. And a learning burn rate of what will really make a learner move from slow learner to a fast learner, right? So if you look at a typical rocket launch, if you see, and a rocket goes pretty slow initially and it is not able to cross a certain velocity, it's going to burn down, correct? And what is the velocity at which it will definitely go beyond the Earth's crust, right? That is what is called escape velocity, right? Now, we basically wanted to understand what is the learning velocity equivalent of escape velocity. So for us, breaking the Earth's crust is reaching certification, the equivalent, correct? So what we found out is, as part of machine learning, we could find out that this learning burn rate should be a minimum of 2.5 in the first 10 days. And I will just explain what that means, okay? So let us say in the first 10, so per day, we assume that one completion, correct? So 1 day, 1% means 100 days the associate is going to complete the course, correct? Now, first 10 days, if an associate is able to complete 25%, that shows that associate's interest in the course, ability, and the interest in the assignment completion, and just showing that, I have the necessary qualities to become a full stack developer, correct? So for us, the equivalent of escape velocity was 2.5 times in the first 10 days. So in 10 days, if all the associates who could complete 25% usually ended up completing the course in 100 days or even faster. But this 10 days 2.5 is, while I'm telling this very easily now, we found this out after about maybe training the data for maybe 6 months. And the third one we could find out was, so instead of going after all 8,000 associates to complete, the machine learning classification algorithm could tell us that, hey, don't focus on 8,000, focus on this 30. And for how many days? Let's say 20 days. That 30 used to be, so we could focus on a very small group, call them for a workshop, call them for maybe few exercises online, and just get them throughout. So this was throughout India, and get them in that initial phase, right? The teething problems people have. So get through the initial 10% or 25% in first 10 days for the first lot, and the escape velocity is achieved. Then the person is good to go. He or she completes it on time, right? But to understand this, it took us about anywhere between 4 to 6 months of training the data. We did use multiple algorithms. So sklearn was the package for those folks who are really keen to know the package in the algorithm. So nearest neighbors, random forests, support vector machines, decision tree, logistic regression. Now, the one that we got the best result was random forest, simply because, in our opinion, okay, so if there is huge variation between the skill set, huge variation in age, huge variation in degree that they have, huge variation in their business unit to which they belong to, in terms of experience, the variation. Because of this complexity in variation in the data set, right? Random forest probably produced the best result. Otherwise, all other algorithms were very similar, and whatever the algorithm gives as a precision or recall or reality will be very, very different, because the precision and recall will almost always say for that algorithm it's about 100%, because it just takes the training data and runs it on the close to that similar data, right? So it always thinks it is correct. But unless we measure it against real data that used to come in every day, we could not identify what the algorithm was really conveying. And only then we could identify, when we classify, that these students are the ones we need to focus on. These are slow learners, and these are the other extremes, which is maybe a very steady growth, but may not complete in 100 days, or very erratic, suddenly shoot up and then gradually trickle down, or maybe just shoot up and just finish it in maybe 10 days. So we don't, so that is like an escape velocity of 10 days, or learning burn rate of 10 days, 10 factor of 10. We actually wanted only 2.5, right? So those were the differences in the algorithm. So any questions here before I go on to explain how this can be applied in other business scenarios?
So sorry for interrupting. In the previous slide, one query is there, sir.
Yeah.
Before that, sir.
This one?
No, sir. The previous one. The table.
This one?
No, sir. Previous. Actually, in the table, yes, sir. In this one, what is the use of the first column? They're asking about the first column means, because the first column heading is not there. That's 635.
Oh, patient ID. Patient ID.
It's a patient ID.
Patient ID. Yeah. They have just removed that name here because it's a clue,
Yes,
right?
sir.
You don't
Yes,
want
sir.
to give that. Yeah. That's why.
It's a patient ID for that particular hospital.
No. So
It's
sorry.
It's an just like SSN number or any special patient ID for that particular hospital.
Yeah, it's a drug ID.
It's a drug ID.
Yeah. So this is an ID column. Just hold on. Huh? Okay. Hey, sorry. It's a drug ID. So what happens for each drug on which term is recurring how many number of times? So we are actually testing drug effectiveness, right? So for, let us say, one disease, how many types of drugs are, how many drugs or generic drugs are prescribed, and which term is recurring how many times during the day, and what is the frequency of recurrence? And that is how they found out this drug reference. So if you see, look at this one, number of times prescribed and effectiveness rating goes in conjunction with the occurrences. Okay. So this is a text analysis based. This column comes out from text analysis, these two columns. This is the drug ID.
And one more query is asking about, so we are getting the occurrence of text in the prescription of doctor. So it may be possible the same ID have different term and occurrence.
Correct. It will be number of times that text recurs.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any questions here?
Not in the slides. Only in the previous slide it is there.
Okay. So these are some of the learning references I have used. Some of the some of the slides. I mean, I'll stop in this slide for a minute in case you have some questions. Otherwise, this slide is pretty, it's about what all sources are available for us. It's an ocean. I have given whatever I have used here. And particularly for healthcare, I have seen EDX has some good, edx.org has some good, Stanford and other institutes are also coming out with nice healthcare study material, but it's really an ocean, and GitHub as such has massive healthcare related references and health analytics related work, which is all freely available for going through. So again, summary is, while there are huge number of sources, better to get some of these, learn from these and use it for our problem solving. Is how I see this. And we have all these Kaggle and HackerRank kind of websites coming out with competitions. Some of those could be healthcare related data sets. And those are all great opportunities to learn and also contribute to the open source world. Any questions here? So these are more from, I think.
Sorry, sir. One more query.
Yeah.
How far these predictions and analytics projects are received in the real medical world?
Medical world. Okay, I will go back to. So this example I gave you, it gave a 70%. We were, so let us say we choose 40 students, 40 associates for the course certification. We were about, right with about 35 students, or 40 into 70%. 28 students probably we were correct. Maybe the 12 other associates did not end up finishing. But in healthcare world, there is massive variation. So breast cancer I told you about is breast cancer detection by an AI is about 100%. The AI, DeepMind AI algorithm is close to 100% precision. But if you look at, let's say, a colon cancer, the precision is not that great, maybe 40%. And even otherwise, after detecting, for those, if the drug discovery is not yet done, that's all the more painful, because you know that there is a colon cancer, but there is no treatment available. So both fronts, we are still lagging behind. And that's why that specific slide where I showed you, AI has lot of scope, lot of things it has been able to do, but unless this field of biomedical and collaboration between engineering and OT and medicine, that A intersection B intersection C, if that unless that works fine, this speed of drug discovery and detection algorithms, we still have a long way to go. That is the. Does that answer your question? And very similar. So if you look at this algorithm, same thing can be done for drug discovery, particularly chronic illness or terminal illness. If we're able to find out the escape velocity for a drug, let's say if the dosage is high during initial days for a terminally ill patient and he or she recovers during the initial days because of some dosage, then very similar classification algorithm, very similar burn rate concept, precision recall reality is far more serious here, because it's not about an associate passing a certification, right? It's far more serious about life and death of a person. So the algorithm might be the same base algorithm, but obviously the columns will all, for principal component analysis, the columns will be different. But this base fundamental logic that we use will all be very similar. Sort of connecting this real life project to a healthcare project. Okay, this slide is, I think, pretty, it is too generic. Just that, if there are various ways in which we have interest in an area we can solve. So unless there are any other questions, I have few more slides, but if there are any questions I can take, but otherwise, few more generic slides that will come up in future. So I'm going to go in these health related slides. I'm going to skip some of these. I'll come back to this power of visualization maybe. So I'm going to talk about this specific one. Okay, so and I spoke about this briefly. So how this is, so when this was about maybe 4 or 5 months back, when a lot of people were saying that okay, AI might be able to come out with some good um, cure for COVID. If you see, there is lot of data that that the algorithms could not see. Things like maybe it was not able to identify few simple characteristics like between a cat and an X-ray. Maybe there were some of those image-related classification algorithms were had to be trained differently. Plus, there were other very similar-looking lungs, similar-looking X-rays. They could not make out the difference heavily. So the confidence with which even a prediction about whether it's a COVID or not, because there were a lot of asymptomatic cases as well, right? So that itself, there were weaknesses in the algorithm. So why I'm saying this is also again about when I told about breast cancer, right? The DeepMind AI is able to predict probably a far more complex disease, illness with lot more precision. And because of which the early detection of breast cancer leads to far better cure. It's almost 100% curable. Now, comparatively, if you see for COVID, if you apply similar early detection during probably now they have trained lot more images and we have lot more patient data to say with lot more confidence about the about COVID. Days when asymptomatic cases were a lot, the algorithms could not be trained to get this kind of insight. Just that why still AI needs to be data needs to be taken up with a pinch of salt. The second one is about the data that gets represented. So what is today happening in this AI world in general and healthcare in particular is that lot of this is moving into what is called explainable AI. So what explainable AI means is, for a layman, can we tell in simple terms what this X-ray means, or what this chart means, what this graph means? And that's where that power of visualization I was talking about. So before I go to that visualization slide, any questions on this slide?
No, sir. No query in the chat box.
So some of these are statistical concepts, but explained very nicely. A lot of this I learned pretty recently. I mean, because statistics we were not taught this way, but I just thought when I was going through the power of visualization, some of this were very well explained. How some of the t distributions and normal, this itself, where how they could be interpreted differently, and what skewness really means, and each skewness is different way, things like that. So summary is that explainable AI plus the need for powerful visualization plus ability to take decisions based on whatever visualizations that come to us, right? For whoever needs to take the decision. and probably it might be as critical as life and death in healthcare particularly. So I think these three are going to play a crucial role, and that's where health analytics is today. So that is all I had, and these are all a lot more of slides which are in theory. But before going into those, I thought there are any questions, I can take those. Okay, a lot of other slides that I have are all based on the algorithms, methods, etc. What are popular. So if I can get some, maybe I will run through these quickly. If you have questions, maybe you can ask. Otherwise, this is all I had in terms of health analytics to cover today. Because these are all a lot more of theory, and some of these could be practical. But if there are some examples that you need, I can go deeper. So for example, this slide shows, so I spoke briefly about each business case that can be mapped to an algorithm, right? So this one is about which algorithms are popular. So if you typically see a regression, one of the things fascinating things that we see now in AI world, which was not very clear when we were doing the theory, was that nonlinear regression is not really nonlinear. Nonlinear is just a way to make the system believe that a linear regression is supposed to behave like a nonlinear regression, right? So those kind of insights is what fascinated while doing this, and we clearly now have which algorithms will work better for what kind of data set, those kind of things. So this slide was like a warm up to go into that business algorithm, or rather business case to algorithm mapping related work. And things we can go deeper into this, which is, so let's say those typical forecasting algorithms, right, which used to use beta values, or which used to have seasonality and trend to be cut out, and then calculate, maybe based on moving averages, etc., calculate ANOVA based calculation of prediction, right, compared to today's way of machine learning based forecasts or prediction algorithms, and how those differ is what is given here. Here it's not about a business case mapping, but this is more about what it actually means and what are their individual advantages and disadvantages in these prediction algorithms. So these are not time series predictions. These are more like prediction using maybe a classification or when they run regression on these. So how causation is not the same as correlation, right? So those come out in this correlation charts. So correlation is mainly about finding association, particularly in NLP. We have used correlation pretty usefully, where, so let us say you have a dump of a corpus of data, and we have to find out, let's say, what is the frequently recurring problem in that, let's say, a server. So let's say it shows data. So now if we want to find out correlation between this word data and with which word is this word frequently recurring, we can use a simple function called find assoc, which is like a finding out association between this word data and any other word that is coming up in the text. So for example, it could be big data, it could be a data error, it could be a data insight, or it could be data analysis, right? So by doing that, we will be able to use NLP to find out correlation or finding association between terms that are frequently recurring. So if you notice again, that terms based prescription which we saw, it's again very similar algorithm, but it's just that in that case it was specific to a single word, but you can do bigram, trigrams, which are all multiple words together coming in, plus find a sox. You can pass one word and see how many other words are recurring within each row, within each corpus, and so on. So that is how non-numeric NLP can be done on non-numeric data. And in regression, is there a way we can say that, okay, for these independent variables, what is the dependent variable? Like how I spoke about the prediction of passing, right? Or how a regression algorithm can be used for, first of all, classifying and then coming out with the target variables value. Again, these are all things where you can say which descriptive analysis or quantitative analysis you want to use which type of algorithm. And so nowadays the other one that is coming up is straight through processing of AI, where so if you give multiple inputs, multiple data sets to an algorithm like H2O or ENSO, what these AI companies have done is they have come out with an entire full stream of work, or rather processes or steps that it follows to come out with an end result. So for example, if you send a 100 million patient data to it, this H2O will go through the data, find out the principal components, do some unsupervised learning, pass on the results to the supervised learning model, and then the supervised learning will run all the various algorithms. Could be SVM or random forest or whatever algorithms, and then in the end say, okay, looks like SVM is the best method, or logistic regression is the best method, gradient boosting, etc. So that entire set today, what we are doing manually, and probably in the end also tell that this is the explanation for this result. So that explainable AI coming out right from the time we pass simple basic data to it, that full set getting managed by somebody like a H2O is so knowing all this will help when we go manually step by step. But today, a lot of this is getting abstracted, and obviously when there are anomalies or when we want to find out deviations from the normal, we have to know the underlying concepts that will really help in troubleshooting. But in general, a lot of this is slowly getting to become more meaningful to normal folks who take decisions based on these. So while some of these are not directly healthcare related examples, application to healthcare cannot be discounted. We can certainly apply in healthcare. So here, supervised, unsupervised, and this is
sorry for disturbing, sir. In the previous slide, they have one query, sir. Not
Yes.
this one. In the previous one more about the algorithms.
Yeah.
The question is not this one. The previous one.
This
yes,
one?
sir. This one. In this one, sir. The question is, in what basis the algorithms were ranked, whether it's based on accuracy or real-time usage for data analysis?
No. Okay. See, some of these websites like Kaggle, right? So what they do is, or GitHub, they go into some corpus of code that is available. So typically code which is open source is GitHub. So they will go into GitHub and they will find out which algorithms, which languages, which packages, which installations are happening, which version of library is used most. That kind of analysis is continuously done. This is almost every day this happens. Now, if you see this chart, it is about, let's say, R and Python code that gets posted in GitHub. And out of those, find out, so it goes into the code, it goes into the basically the text of the code, and finds out which algorithms use maximum, and then ranks it based on the frequency of recurrence. So from that, they have found out that regression is, and again, it's all time bound. Okay, so it's not like this is cut in stone. It's so please don't take decisions or come to conclusions just based on this chart. This chart is just a nice way to know. Oh, okay, let us look at it from maybe 2 or 3 different dimensions. Okay, one is which algorithm should I definitely know? Number one is, according to me, linear regression, because any linear regression or linear equation, if we know how to make the linear equation look like a non-linear, let's say for a S curve, how to make a linear regression look like a non-linear regression or work as a non-linear one, we know how to do that. There are specific algorithms available. This is just to give a glimpse of, based on code repositories or based on maybe some Kaggle competitions, which algorithms are used maximum by developers. So there is no decision that we can take using these, but it is a good reference for people who are starting off on data science. Does that help?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So what we see here, a little bit about unsupervised, supervised. I'm sure a lot of you must be experienced and know far more and far better, and you would have worked on these. But just to tell a little bit about my own experience is that, so we used to first do unsupervised, take the results and pass it on to supervised, etc. But now, if you see the new tools like H2O particularly, it does all of this on its own. It takes up all this, does all this clustering, and takes the result of all this, passes the principal components to supervise, and then the supervise comes out with its own inferences and provides insight. So summary is, a lot of this is going to be automated, but what is going to still remain is, if there is an error, or if there is a decision that needs to be taken, or if individual steps there are results that come out, or if the data needs to be cleaned up. Let's say out of 1 million records, let's say date of birth is not there for 10,000 records. What would you usually put? Will you just take an average? Will you take a so if by doing that, if there is going to be a change in the results, substantial significant change in the results of these supervised or unsupervised models, what will you fill up the missing values? What will you fill up null values? What will you do for averages? Which independent variables would you use as factors? Which ones will you convert as maybe treated as numerical? Those are all decisions which will still be with the data scientist. But lot of this work is getting automated simply because people want quick results and they want AI to be picturized well, visuals, and the need for summaries, good summaries. That's the reason why all this is getting automated. So in no way is the need for knowing each of these steps in detail, knowing each of these algorithms in a very detailed manner, that is never going to stop. particularly things like, let's say, a decision tree versus a random forest, unless people know that a random forest comes really out of a decision tree and slight difference and what type of data set change will make a random forest better, that kind of specific specialist experience will never go away. Having said that, there are summaries which will come out and obvious points, obvious problems, which, through logical steps we can find out. Explainable AI will be able to do it maybe 2 years, 5 years from now, but it's already doing. But 2 years, 5 years from now, it will become even more better. But the underlying fundamental concepts, knowledge of those algorithms in depth, which type of data set, which type of business case, which type of algorithm will work well, I think those will never fade away, is my opinion. Any questions here? So some of these, so I spoke about some of the business cases, right? So if you look at this here, the use cases where you can use in general, the general ones in health insurance space, which is claim settlement or claim forecasting, etc. But some of these are generic or cuts across verticals, like fraud detection or a chatbot or robos or prediction of damages, etc. Right? So those are all things which cut across technologies, and that's what I was talking about, the anomaly detection as their common algorithm. Right? These are all very similar, and these are evergreen, and knowledge of these will help us cut across any domains, any use cases across areas of interest. Other than that, so that is all I had, unless you folks have any questions.
Sir, question from my side.
Yeah.
Sir, is it possible to give the rankings to the hospitals based upon their previous data?
Very much. I think so something like this is already available. So see, there are two ways to answer this. One is the advent of blockchain. So today what is happening, if you take up a hospital, it
Yes,
is
sir.
like choosing our favorite doctor, right? So in our times, what we used to do, the roadside doctor used to be our favorite doctor, or we will say, okay, for my child, maybe this is the good doctor. For my father, this is a good doctor, like that, right? Now, slowly, it has become hospitals. Now, in our mind, we have a perception about hospitals, but slowly there are algorithms that are coming up for ranking hospitals. So we used to say that based on these features, maybe price, ability to solve diseases, nearness to my house, or doctors being very patient with me, they listen to my problem, etc. Or maybe their drug effectiveness, or maybe my neighbor says that they have this doctor treats well in this hospital, or maybe the specialists that are available in this hospital are. So these characteristics, if you take as independent variables, right, run it through unsupervised learning, and then it will give you a bunch of things. So again, that's why, maybe I need to run this through this logic. So first, what do? You have a clustering algorithm which will say let's say out of 100 hospitals, 30 hospitals are in one group, 30 are here, 30 are here, or maybe 40 are here, correct? Now, it does based on its own understanding of whatever independent variables I just now gave you, correct? Now take these and pass it to the supervised learning algorithm, and where the machine will decide, okay, these hospitals look like, maybe great hospitals. These hospitals can be categorized as maybe average hospitals. These hospitals are maybe less than average. And once that classification is done, we can clearly say from this classification, we can do analysis of which hospitals are good for what, and predict for what kind of disease, for what kind of age group, for what demography, price range, which hospital will be a good choice. Just one stream of thought. There are various other things which we can do. For example, when you say this teacher is great, this professor is great, or this college is great, or this doctor is great, right? Or this hospital is great, what are you having in mind is actually maybe 100 other variables which you are not telling, right? So these 100 variables are actually chains that you have formed in your brain based on multiple experiences, your own or neighbors or friends, relatives, etc. And when these chains are given one solid shape, right, and they are contiguous, that means continuous, and each chain has some value, that is how a blockchain really works. So typical, a very good implementation of blockchain will be this business case, will be this, whatever you are now talking about, hospital ranking system. Blockchain is a great way to implement a hospital ranking system. Not necessary. It can do with simple unsupervised, supervised, and prediction. But one of the ways in which you can use is blockchain. Anyway, don't know whether I answered the question directly, but answer is yes, very much doable. And I think they are doing this already. See, if a movie can be rated, a hospital can very well be rated, right? So
because the hospitals are not willing to share their electronic health records.
correct. So I will go back a little bit. So if you see here, EHR, EMR, right? So there is now, I don't know about India. In India, we wanted for that malnutrition project some data from the Department of Public Health. But I think the data that they have is at a state level, not at a district level. So we could not do much. So you can imagine if that is at an aggregate level, EHR at patient level is even worse, correct? But in the US, there is a huge movement for stripping out all the patient-related personal information and convert that into a real core data that can be used for analysis purposes. So EHR, EMR is today definitely someday or the other, this is going to come into the realm of public space. Obviously, for them, it's a huge legal hurdle that they have to cross. The second one is there is something called CMS. So I don't know if you have seen the CMS website in the US, cms.org. Plenty of data available. May not be directly this, but things related to, let's say, drug effectiveness or clinical related data, provider data, hospital related data. A lot of that is available. So if you want to do just an algorithm,